Hello, everyone. Welcome again. It's Adam Caplan here for Inside the Birds. And with us again is a good friend of the program of Jeff Mosher and I. It's Aaron Borgmann. He and his partner, Evan Kraft, host the great Sports Med Bros podcast, which you can find on all podcasting platforms. Aaron, good to see you again, man.
Thanks for having me on this morning, Adam. I really appreciate it. And thanks for the shout out for the pod.
Yeah, for sure. So let's speaking of that, I'm sure there are others out there, not that I'm aware of, but you're the only guys who are really doing it who've worked for teams. So give our listeners an idea of what you and Evan do on your what do you discuss on your podcast? When can they find it and where can they find it?
Yeah. So, like I said, the Sports Med Bros is what it's called. We went through a rigorous naming process, as you can probably tell.
Apparently.
We do think that we're the only former NFL sideline guys doing something regularly. So we like that. But that being said, we don't cover just NFL stuff. We cover all topical sports, medical injuries, rehab topics, a little bit of science mixed in. But like you said previously, we like to call it edutainment because we have some laughs, we have some guests on. We've got some phenomenal stuff lined up for this summer and kind of the
Mm.
doldrums of the summer. So be on the lookout for that. Can be found anywhere you find your podcast, the Sports Med Bros. But pretty straightforward, man. We just like to have a good time with it, and any and all topics are welcome.
So what was your motivation to get into obviously you work for the Eagles and Chiefs, but just growing up, what to study medical science and to be a trainer? Um, what was your motivation to get into that business?
Yeah, so I'm a sports nut, just like most of the people that we all interact with, but I wasn't very good, quite frankly. And I got hurt a couple times and tried to rehab through it, and I didn't enjoy the experience. And so, like a lot of the things in my life, I am just stubborn enough to think that I can do something better than somebody else. And so I had told myself I was going to go to school for orthopedic surgery. And then I found that you got to go to school for quite a long time, more so than I wanted to, and ended up on the rehab side of things, the sports medicine physical therapy school. And just thought that was my way into professional sports and to stay involved in sports my whole life. And so it's been kind of a whirlwind journey. Obviously in the NFL full time for 12 years, but then now in private practice, taking care of all these people on the side. And something that you may not even know, I recently just signed on as an independent contractor consultant for one of the premier country clubs in town. So
No,
I,
really, in
I
Kansas City.
yeah, Oakwood Country Club. I am the sports medicine provider for the membership and membership at large, and even outsiders in our Oakwood Performance Center, which we're hoping to grow into one of the better golf performance centers in the Midwest, if not the nation eventually. So,
So what will your role be there?
sports medicine needs for any
Uh,
golfers, quite frankly,
Okay.
injured or not injured, just looking for performance improvement.
Well, interesting. Very cool.
Yeah.
So let's get to your career in the NFL. So you were with the Eagles first. Actually, were weren't you with the Rams before that, or am I mistaken?
I was with the Rams for a couple years in college
Yeah.
as a summer intern.
Okay. Okay. So you moved to the Eagles in Philly. You and I have not talked about this before. I know I met you years ago when we talked, but what was your time when you got to Philly? What did you think about the area, the fans? Where did you live? Give us an idea of that experience.
Yeah, so my very first day seeing Philadelphia ever was my first day on the job. Um,
Oh,
I had
really?
never been to Philadelphia in my life. I was
Oh my
excited
gosh.
to do something new. My
Yeah.
then fiance, now wife, was working in New York City,
Yeah.
and so it was going to work out well with the transition. But I started living about what I call halfway down on Broad Street with a friend for like 6 weeks until I found an apartment up by the art museum. And I lived on Green Street by the art museum
There it
for
is.
a year
Yeah.
and a half ish. And then I lived in the heart of the Italian market at
Oh,
10th and Catherine for a very long time, six and a
nice.
half ish years,
Yeah.
literally above Dante and Luigi's for any of your listeners who know where Dante and Luigi's is at down there.
Wow.
Yeah, so I was in the heart of it, and I loved that whole scene. Like,
That's
just
cool.
I love Philadelphia. Still to this day, I talk very fondly about Philadelphia. So, it was a cool experience, man. I wouldn't trade it anything for the world. I can drop my R's and my vowels, and I can turn on my Philly accent anytime anybody wants. So.
Yeah. Do you drink water or water?
I do not drink water. I do
Yeah,
not.
I got you.
I'm a water kind
I
of
got
guy.
you.
I'm from the
Okay.
Midwest.
So where'd you meet your partner there, Evan Kraft?
So Ev and I actually met here when I moved over to the Chiefs.
Okay.
We came over with Andy. There were 17 of us from Philadelphia that
Oh,
kind of made the switch, which was great for me since
wow.
I'm from Missouri
Yeah.
originally. And we hired Evan midsummer in preparation for the season. He stayed on several years after me, obviously enjoyed all those rings and all that fame and fortune. And I just like to say that we did all the hard work and I left so he could enjoy it. So.
So let's get back to the Eagles. So you get there, you're kind of learning the area and so forth, but you're working for an NFL team. What first of all, you worked under Andy Reid, really? I mean, but you work with Rick Burkholder, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. But Andy Reid's the head coach. This is his first head coaching job. Now he's one of the best in NFL history. What were your first remembrances of Coach Reid?
Oh man, back then, I mean, this was 2006 was my first year in the NFL. And so Big Red is just a wonderful guy to work for, and I can't sing that praise enough. But I'll tell you, he's a lot more softened around the edges now than he was back then. He was intense, intense back then. And he was even when we moved here to Kansas City. I think winning a couple rings and being, in that position every year has kind of rounded some edges, if you know what I mean.
Sure.
But yeah, like you minded your P's and Q's, you did the work, and I was, a first year person trying to just fit in and figure out where my place was in life, and so I was pretty straight laced. But yeah, it was a intense, very rigorous, regimented place to work. That being said, I loved it. I loved the intensity of it, and I loved the structure of it all. And if there's one thing that Andy is, it's intense and structured.
Sure. Oh, my good. The craziness, we've talked about this maybe once in our 8 years that we've done the show of, okay, you can't sit down at practice and you can't lean on anything.
Mm-mm.
And I was like, what the hell? I had asked the PR staff, I'm like, can you explain this? And they explained it to me. Just want people to think like they're dogging it. You want to show energy. He got it from Mike Holmgren, I think, but that's fine. But Andy was very unique, as you know. Here's my first question for you. So you get there, let's say regular season training camp. Then I want to get to the draft, which we just had because I know it's a little different. What were your daily responsibilities?
So I was the lowest of the low rung in the medical staff at my first couple of years there for sure.
Yeah.
And so, you're setting up the field for practice, you're restocking supplies, you're running some rehabs as the, new man on the block. It's not like I got Donovan McNabb, my first rehab ever. No, I starting with training camp players and rookies and things like that.
Mm,
I didn't get the Westbrooks and the McNabbs early on. I got, people that were proving themselves much like I was. And so, you have a lot of menial tasks and responsibilities, but you got to do those well in order to prove to do the other stuff. So, stocking coolers, setting up fields, running
sure.
to the pharmacy, things like that you can't hardly screw up unless you just don't have effort. And so you get trusted with those and you do those well, you get some more stuff and so on and so forth. And, we'd all been professionally proven because we had degrees and things, but you still have to kind of trial by fire, if you will, in the NFL at that time. And, had to prove yourself. And so day to day tasks were getting up at the butt crack of dawn, being there before anybody else. And, you can never beat Andy in the building, but being there before everybody else on the medical staff and, opening up the room, things like that, cleaning, just all the stuff that, the low person on the totem pole does till you prove that you can kind of handle the bigger stuff. And so that took a little bit of time. And I won't be shy about telling you that I wasn't very good at first. And there was a very,
Hmm.
very high standard in that room. And so it took me a while to kind of find my footing. But yeah, I mean, I think over time and with a lot of effort and a lot of learning on my part that I kind of figured out what it was like to be in that environment, a very intense environment, as you know, because it's all hands on deck all the time. And yeah, I mean, it was just a phenomenal experience and learned many, many life lessons, set aside all the sports medicine stuff, but just how
Sure.
to, push through things and stuff like that.
So when you have a guy, here's a name for old time Eagle fans, right? And because you just talked about how you started, at the bottom, you work your way up, but here's a guy who was a fifth round pick, and I'm going to bring up a guy. You were definitely there then. It's Cornelius Ingram. How do you
Oh
handle
yeah.
a guy who's come back, ACL, correct, if I'm not
Yeah.
mistaken,
Yeah.
who never wound up playing for them? I think if he did, it was very briefly. I'll look it up, but I don't remember.
Correct. It was pretty brief on the comeback.
So what? How do you get a guy that you know? This is a good question for you. You're told, okay, here's the injury information. He never wound up playing. How do you handle a guy coming in like that? Do you already rehabbing him, or like do you just use the information you're given? How do you handle that?
So, pardon me. So you take what you get from the medical staff from where they're coming from, right? And you kind of piece that together because now it's a little bit different from back then. The records not being as good as what they were and all this and that.
Right.
But with CI, like he had just attacked rehab, man. Like he went after it. And history is littered with those individuals that do that, but just don't quite either make it back or, whatever circumstance, you know, injury. I don't want to say, I hate the term injury prone, but guys that just couldn't hold up in the NFL. And unfortunately, CI ended up being one of those guys. But man, you kind of assess what they can do because now they're, I don't want to say property, but you have their rights, right? So they're not going anywhere else. And then the way the system used to be set up, it's different a little bit now, but they had to stay with you for rehab under Andy. And so, it's not like you could go do some outside stuff on your own after the fact, but you had to do everything in house. And that's the way we liked it because you could kind of control all the variables better that way. And so, that being said, a guy like CI who's coming in, and he kind of got the red shirt year treatment, which is what he needed and was doing as good as he possibly could when it was time to perform. But, in that regard, I think that he was a unique case study because he really took it to heart to kind of like use that time period for his own and then not only learning the playbook and so on and so forth, but really being his best physical self, putting that forward.
Let's talk about a guy who, when he came in, there was so much excitement. DeSean Jackson. You see a body like that, very, very thin. How do you handle a guy who's so scrawny, so thin? Is there okay? Are the Chip Kelly milkshakes? I mean, what do we tell? How do you get a guy stronger other than lifting weights? What's the process of getting a guy stronger?
Well, I mean, with D-Jack, listen, I think everybody could tell over the years he wasn't one to like got really, really bulky or anything like that. Luckily he could just run away from everybody for the most
Right.
part and not have a ton of contact. But when, you try to accentuate what he can do well, right? And you don't want to change a player. That's not what we're there for. You want to make them the healthiest version of themselves possible and maybe fill in some gaps on some deficits and things like that. But even if you look at DJ today, he's not very big. And so, one of those things where you say, okay, look, we could tweak this here, we could borrow from that there, make this a little bit better there.
Hmm.
And you just try to essentially make them the best version of themselves. Don't try to change them too much. And I think he did a really nice job of that. Like he was really good. He rehabbed hard. That's the one thing I remember about DJ. He did not like being in the training room at all from a sitting up, not doing stuff standpoint. So he always worked hard when he was in the athletic training room. And I think it's just a testament to him as a player.
There was a guy who the Eagles thought very highly of, who they really believe could be their next middle linebacker for many years. That was Stewart Bradley,
Yeah.
who suffered the ACL injury at flight night, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
That one, it was okay. So ACL, you've been on our show before. You've discussed how medical science has come a long way. You can get these guys back earlier. What do you think happened to him? Why was he never the same?
Well, listen, Stu was a great kid, man. I liked him quite a bit. I was sad when, he kind of moved on to Arizona, I believe was his next stop, if memory
Yep.
serves correctly,
Yep.
from a personal standpoint. And, sometimes we see these guys, it could be anybody. They've only got so many reps in them total, right?
Hmm.
And so if you take some of those away and you diminish them, now you're taking that total away from them, period. And so When Stewart rehabbed, man, he was another guy that really, really, truly attacked his rehab and put everything he had into it. And he was kind of a physical freak of an athlete to begin with. He's a bigger guy, pretty big for a middle linebacker, tall,
6'3". Yep.
yeah, big guy. And so, I don't have a great answer for
Yeah.
why his career didn't work out. He better than it did, quite frankly. He did everything the right way.
Cool.
I will say that it wasn't anything that he did incorrectly or the
Yeah.
process was done. I think his body was kind of talking back to him at the end of his career there a little bit more than most people's did. But it was a tough scene to see that decline because I cared for him so much as an
Yeah.
individual, just being around him so much.
Sure. Sure. What are some of your favorite stories of rehabbing players who just took off? You told us about the Brandon Graham story, which is incredible considering, again, you correct me if I'm wrong. You told us that he had a patella and ACL to the same knee.
Yeah.
How in the world were you guys able to get him back? It's the first time in my career I'd ever heard someone have that to the same knee. Usually it's, but you might have one on one knee and one on the other, the same knee. How in the world did you get this guy back on the field?
Well, and taking aside him, there's other people that have had, complex knee surgeries for that
Yeah.
regard. Well, you have to stage them, right? So you can only,
Right.
because the
Right.
different surgeries require different, range of motion and strength limitations early on. And so because of that, we see it more often with ACL and MCL now, where you have to do one surgery, wait 6 to 8 weeks, do another. I think the wide receiver from the Texans just recently had that done.
Yeah, Tank Dell. Yeah.
Yeah, that's correct. And so, excuse me, you see it more in those types of cases. And so, what it has to do is just really has to come down to a really solid plan of attack, right? Okay, we're going to do this, this, and this, and then we're going to jump back on it and do this, this, and this. And you almost have to reverse engineer it from when you think that they're going to be back. Okay, then this stage, then this stage, then this stage kind of thing. And
Right.
so that's the way I've always done it because if you look at the projected timeline, I think that leads to the best outcomes, quite frankly. But yeah, I mean, there's never a set guideline for sure. It's what does the athlete got to do, what type of
Sure.
athlete they are, what position do they play. A lot comes into it, and where are you projecting them? Sadly, I think sometimes contract status comes into that. But it is what it is, man. Like everybody's a little bit different, and I think different athletes respond to that challenge differently. I think we've seen that over the course of history where some people come back from those just phenomenally gruesome, complex knee injuries and so forth, and some don't.
So, Aaron, you talked about your time as a trainer, your training camp leading up to the season, and so forth. What was your role with the Chiefs and Eagles leading up to the draft each year?
So, luckily or unluckily, depending upon how you see it, I did not have a ton of draft responsibility
Okay.
either stop. I was what I would call draft adjacent on the medical team for sure. Other people definitely had more responsibility. I was there to help compile information. A lot of times we would have to call schools that people that did go to the combine or you didn't have great relationships with, so you'd have to find out medical information. I was kind of on the backside of that. I was always kind of right, wrong, or otherwise tended to be more on the rehab side of things. So as you well know, in the off season, rehab's flying everywhere to get guys ready. And so that was one of more my prime responsibilities. That being said, had to be around it, had to be aware of it, had to have knowledge of it for sure. Went to the combine every year that I could when off-season rehab wasn't calling more pertinent deals, and was aware of the guys that we were obviously looking at, sat in all the draft meetings, sat in all the
Sure.
medical meetings, things like that. Just wasn't a primary responsibility. Felt like that was more than enough for me, quite frankly. It is more minutia than anybody could ever possibly imagine. And I'm sure it's even worse with all the information today that we have. In
Sure.
in a lot of regards, not having as much information honestly made the thing more simpler.
Mm.
Now you can kind of get lost in the sauce and paralysis by analysis kind of thing, in my opinion. But the thing holds true. You got to find out as much information as you can, and then how you use it and how you're assessing risk is really the crux of it all because everybody does that differently. And every team feels differently about every
Yep.
condition. The grading scale for medical and orthopedic stuff is roughly the same, but everybody has their own tweaks. Everybody puts different things in different categories. And, it's what I call it's a process that has specificity to it by team.
All right, so let's talk quickly about Aaron. A couple of Eagles draftees have either size concerns or injury concerns. Now, Jihaad Campbell, the Eagles' first-round pick, had shoulder labrum surgery. You could obviously explain what that would entail and what. I know you're not examining him, but you know about this surgery for NFL players. He's a linebacker. He's an off-the-ball linebacker. Plus, he's also probably going to play edge. So, what would be the concerns coming back from that injury for that player? Just overall, what's the rehab like?
Yeah, so your shoulder labrum, just a real quick anatomy lesson, is basically the covering of the inside of your shoulder blade, your glenoid, that's the technical term for
Yeah.
that, and it covers that for to reduce friction, to make motion a little bit easier. Think of it, if you will, as the meniscus of your shoulder. You have one in your shoulder, you have one in your hip. Those are basically the same joint as ball and socket joints. That being said, labrums can tear very easily in football players from
Mm.
falls to the ground, from getting a dislocation will tear a labrum very easily, or just wear and tear, or, kind of football, hashtag football could, disrupt your labrum. Think about a linebacker, right? You're always stabbing with your shoulder. You're constantly
Yep.
engaging with your arm and being pulled different directions. And so there's a whole host of injuries that can happen from that. So labral tears, especially in defensive or interior players, are pretty common, quite frankly, because they use their hands so much, less so in offensive skill players, unless there's been a traumatic accident. So, nature of the position makes it, kind of, I don't want to say predicated to having it, but it definitely doesn't help. So, we see them mostly in linemen, quite frankly, in my experience. That being said, this used to be somewhere in the vicinity of a 6 month-ish type deal. That timeline has kind of been
For
walked.
contact? For contact?
Yeah,
Or
yeah.
okay, contact. Okay.
Now that timeline has been walked back, and obviously it's hugely variable, excuse me, on the size of the repair and the location more so. If it's in the back side of the shoulder versus the front side of the shoulder, if it's kind of what they would call a full thickness tear or a 180-degree tear, all of these things depend.
Mm,
Obviously, we don't have that information,
sure.
but I can tell you, after doing a little bit of research on this athlete, looked like he was doing a lot of things very early. I saw a video of him running on a treadmill pretty freely. I think that video's out there somewhere
Okay.
if anybody wants to go look at it. And that was taken, a month or so after surgery. So, clearly doing very well with regards to the beginning stages. Obviously, we can't comment on what it's going to
Yeah.
be like in the future. That being said, we've gotten, as rehab professionals, gotten pretty good at these, quite frankly. While I'm sure he was docked by some people in the draft for this. I'm quite certain he probably wasn't taken off of anybody's draft
Yeah.
board or anything like that. I wouldn't pretend to know the details, but listen, I think, smart move if the kid's got enough talent, and obviously the management team can grade that, but we're pretty decent at these from a rehab standpoint. And I do like the fact that the kid did all the testing and stuff at the combine to prove this, right? And then did the surgery after.
Correct.
Because knowing that timeline, it would probably be an excellent candidate for a PUP situation or even an NFI situation, depending upon how the NFL decides to classify his deal. That's kind of up to them, right? But definitely is not needed to rush back because he didn't get hurt with the team, right? Because you're coming in with a previously injured thing, so I have
NFI.
to believe it's going to be an
Yeah.
NFI situation.
Sure. Sure.
That being said, they're going to give this kid the time that he needs. He sounds like he's an outstanding talent if the health is there. The rehab process is not dissimilar to anything else. You go through a period of mobilizing things, getting your motion back first and foremost, then a strength phase, and then your functional phase. And so it appears that he's got, he didn't appear to have any mobility concerns at his opening presser, which I saw a clip of, or, running on the treadmill or anything like that. So it appears that he's doing very well, at least in that phase. And The strengthening phase tends to overlap with that a little bit just because you're always doing some strength to some extent. So, listen, it's going to be an interesting case to follow for sure. I think that fans and, media and stuff could expect to see him doing some things at some point during training camp, whether he opens up practicing or if he's off to the side or whatnot. I think that's, fully within the realm of possibility for sure. I don't know that the timeline would put him practicing day one, but maybe, who knows?
And now this is an interesting one because Jeff Mosher and I, we've talked to various people around the league and who love Drew Mukuba, who's their Eagles second round pick out of Texas. But they all bring up not that 186 is super small, but he's got a narrow, angular build. He's on the thinner side, and he's going to be a safety for them. He might play nickel later on, but he's going to be safety. And he's for his build, man. He throws his shoulder in there. He gets after it, Aaron. So, do you look at build like when you're bringing guys in? Do you take a look at the musculature and frame, skeleton, all that stuff?
You know, I'm going to answer your question thusly. I
Okay.
think it's one of those deals where coaches and GMs and scouts kind of have those concepts out there. The medical staff is always there to report, not
Okay.
opine. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Like, we're here to give information and facts and potentially projections on medical conditions. When it comes to that type of stuff, that always seemed to fall into coaches, which I wasn't ever quite sure why. Like, well, we need this guy to be at 205 and this guy plays better at,
Yeah.
322 or, like, all right, first of all, how do you know that? That's just ridiculous.
Hmm.
But second of all, like, I was always a big proponent of letting people play where they're most comfortable. If somebody thinks they play better at this, then let them play at that. If somebody thinks they need to put on 4 more pounds to do the beating of the season, let them do that. And so, like, I think the players kind of know that. And quite frankly, Adam, I'm a put on the film and see what a guy can do. And so,
Hmm.
if he's playing well at that, then let him play at that. But that seems to be something that a lot of people get caught up in, above my pay grade kind of thing.
So you leave
Instead,
it up to the coaches in front office. Say, hey, we need mass in this guy's frame, or do you? I mean,
I think
if you see,
it was always a conversation between the
okay,
coaches and the medical staff,
okay,
higher ups, and the strength staff, of course, because they're kind of the
yes,
ones in
right,
charge of that type of thing.
yeah,
But that being said, I think that's one of those more subjective decisions. I
hmm,
always tried to lean on more the objective stuff because I knew that's the stuff
yeah,
I could control.
sure, sure. It's that's an interesting discussion, by the way. 'Cause, like, we brought up Djax. He's a guy who's bony anyway,
Hmm.
but as one coach told me with a smaller player who could run, he goes, "You don't want to do anything to make to impact his ability to run." So it's like if you want to put mass on a guy's frame, well, 10 pounds could make the guy slower. I mean, you got to be careful, right?
That's not somebody you're going to want to put 10 pounds on. The
Yeah. Yeah.
speed's his weapon. It's his
Although
one of his only defenses. So
Djax actually did put some last time I saw him with the Eagles when he came here in like 2020, I was like, wow, did he put his legs were not toothpicks anymore. I was like, wow. Then again, he was older in his mid-30s, so that's gonna
age
happen.
catches up with us all,
Yeah,
Adam.
of course. I know. Exactly, exactly. All right, so before we get out of here, what so you did a draft show I saw recently.
Mhm.
What else you guys got coming up on the Sports Med Bros podcast?
So we're gonna have some couple guests over the course of the summer, some practitioners and some athletes coming up, and so that's the part that I'm excited to share about. That we are, kind of mixing in guests because over the summer, obviously, sports kind of tend to slow down a little bit before football ramps back up
Yep.
in the fall. So we're gonna kind of backfill with some guests, some stories. I'll not gonna break any news here, but we've actually got some live shows coming up from a couple medical conventions over the
Really?
summer,
Cool.
and
Cool.
so we've been asked by a couple groups to be a part of that, and we're very excited about that.
Nice, man.
So I don't know if that makes us influencers or activators or what we are anymore, but we're having fun
Very
and
nice.
trying to highlight good people in the profession and good companies in the profession and bring information to people that may not know it.
Well, Aaron, we appreciate your time. Check out the Sports Med Bros podcast on any platform. And that's Aaron Borgman. I'm Adam Caplan. We'll speak to you soon.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.